On Perspective this week, former Health Minister David Ashford and Chief Minister Alf Cannan reflect on the fallout from the Dr Ranson tribunal. But first, Tim Glover tells us why he resigned from his departmental roles and how he has lost faith in government.
Well, I think it was time for somebody to speak out. We keep going round in circles, it seems, not just with the Ransom case, but with the culture of government as it's become the tagline. And that's not just this administration, that's going back several administrations. And time enough. I'm losing faith that, and the trust has certainly been fractured with the public over this, the Ranson case, but it is much wider than just the Ranson case and the Department of Health and Social Care. And I felt last week, and that's why I wrote to the Chief Minister last week, I was really concerned about the statement that he made because it was so narrow about one department. I think the was going to back the standing select committee of Tynwald that Claire Christian was proposing on the supplementary paper, but in reality that was just put there to try and bolster something out of government, which I think we achieved. I don't think it was a runner in the first place because it would have not had the trust of the public. I'm now free, and since I've done what I've done, I've been made aware of 4 more whistleblowing cases across government. People will have confidence to come and talk to me.
That in itself is quite a shocking thing to say because we're talking at the moment, this interview's being conducted, maybe 2-3 hours after you made that your statement?
Yeah, and there were 3 politicians that Dr Ranson trusted to come and see her at the weekend, and we did on Saturday afternoon. That was myself, John Wannenberg and Claire Christian. So there's something in this. And at the moment, trust is so low with the Manx public. And I will try and help as many people as I can. I think one of the most important speeches we heard this morning came from Minister Edge, who's long been a real champion of whistleblowing, and we've already had a chat at lunchtime, and I will do everything I can to help her bring the changes that are needed. So there's lots of work you can do from the back bench.
Government's got really, really big issues that it needs to tackle, like trying to address the massive budget deficit. It's got to solve problems in relation to housing. It's got all these other really big issues to deal with. Is this the one issue that's so important that you needed to make this gesture on?
Absolutely, because the public have really broken ranks, if you like, on this, and this would have just been an anchor weighing government down if it doesn't get sorted out properly, and all the other really important stuff would still get dragged down. So this has to be sorted. It has to be for once and all sorted properly, and it's more than a gesture, and I will try and help sort the problem. Everyone
else supported what the government proposed. There were no amendments, there were no real suggestions that the motion that the Chief Minister presented was wrong. Why are your 30 or so colleagues wrong and you're right on this?
I voted against because I do believe it's reached the stage where we need a much more involved UK public look at investigation into what's going on here to restore not just the Isle of Man's reputation, but the public's trust in government. So, as I'd made it into a resigning matter, I don't think I had any other option but to not support the matter. It's as simple as that.
So you're suggesting that perhaps the UK government should be brought in or should be asked to come in and investigate this matter. Presumably that means that you don't trust your colleagues or indeed government to do this properly.
I'm losing confidence. I said that in my speech, and we only have to look at what the British medical people were saying last week. They're going to go and talk to them.
You also mentioned that you felt perhaps the police should be involved in this. Can you elaborate any more on that?
I'm not going to out of court, no, but I'm not going to say anything that I haven't already got within my grasp and within hand, but that will come. Let's just remember what the tribunal said in its findings. There are a number of very damning words used, and we have lost an awful lot of civil servants who've suddenly disappeared, taken retirement. So let's just see how that works out. But I mean, it's what Dr Ranson said. Remember, she believes lives could have been saved here. That's pretty serious. And that's from Dr Ranson.
David Ashford was Health Minister when the department's relationship with Dr Ranson became hostile. So why is he finally breaking his silence?
Yeah, I've remained silent over the last 12 months because obviously there was an ongoing legal case and I wanted to respect the rule of sub judice and also show respect to Tynwald Court itself. The President changed his ruling this morning in relation to sub judice and what is. So there are certain things we still can't talk about, as the President very clearly laid out, but in general I can speak a lot more freely. And the first thing I want to do is echo what the Chief Minister said in the House of Keys last week. Some of the stuff that came out during this employment tribunal is absolutely disgraceful. Some of the behaviours of senior officers in the department, as I said in Tynwald Court this morning, I wouldn't even describe it as child's playground because that underestimates what it actually is. So Dr Ranson does deserve a massive apology. I was the Minister of the department at the time. There's no getting away from that. It was on my watch that this occurred, and that's why I resigned from government 12 months ago, because I thought it was the right and honourable thing to do. Having seen it, politicians at the end of the day, people expect accountability. Whether that politician's involved in decisions or not, they are still ultimately accountable for the department.
You've sort of implied there that you think you owe Dr Ranson an apology, but you didn't actually give an apology as far as I could understand.
Well, no, I said that I said I'm very, very clear. I echoed the Chief Minister's apology and the apology that the Minister of Department of Health and Social Care gave this morning. Government, as I say, as an organisation, owes a great apology to Dr Ranson, and I hope with what's come out of the tribunal that some of those officers who are named in the tribunal papers will reflect on the behaviours that have actually been identified.
So you don't feel that you have any specific reason to apologise to Dr Ranson?
Well, there was no. We need to be absolutely clear here. There was nothing in the tribunal's findings that actually questioned my behaviour towards Dr Ranson. There was nothing in the judgment that was published last week. In fact, I wasn't referred to once in the 99 pages of the findings that were published on the 2nd of May, I think it was. But I was Minister for the department at the time, and like I say, I'm not trying to dodge that. These behaviours and the cultural issues that led to them happened while I was Minister, and that's why I resigned from government.
I have been told that members of your department, when you were Health Minister, and indeed ministers, pleaded with you to listen to Dr Ranson, and you chose not to.
I'm afraid, I don't know where that's come from, Phil, because I'm afraid that is nonsense. I've at no point in time did I ignore Dr Ranson. I am absolutely adamant on that. I was adamant on that on the tribunal. Everything that I was aware of that she had advised went to council and ministers. So I don't know why there seems to be this thing developing that at some point I ignored Dr Ranson. That is not correct whatsoever. And I need to state that factually now. So I don't know where your sources have come from that, but that is most certainly not correct.
I mean, I got that information from very reliable sources. So you're absolutely adamant that at no stage did you refuse pleas from departmental members or indeed council of ministers to listen to Dr Ranson?
Absolutely categorically. That is completely and utterly not true whatsoever. Every piece of advice that I was aware of that Dr Ranson was giving, as far as I'm aware, went up the chain. So, for instance, the boarders' advice, things like that. There was no instance, I can categorically say, as Minister, where I believe I rejected Dr Ranson's advice or ignored it. Of course, we've got to remember that during the pandemic, there were multiple chains of advice coming. There was public health feeding in. Sometimes the public health advice was different to the medical director's advice, and sometimes the clinician's advice was different, sometimes the testing team's advice was different. And one of the things as politicians we've got to do, and it wasn't down to just me as Minister for Health, remember, I wasn't making all the decisions, it was council and ministers led decisions. What council and ministers at that time had to do was get through all these different opinions and actually work out what the course of action would be. So that's very different to actually ignoring advice. There were occasions when all of the advice had to be pooled, some of which was contradictory from different people, and agree what strategy we were going to follow going forward. But again, I don't want to step on the COVID review, which is ongoing, because I'm sure some of that will come out in that.
As you say, council of ministers will have had conflicting advice, conflicting views, conflicting priorities.
Yes, they did. And during a pandemic, which we hadn't seen for 100 years, that was more evident. I've always said hindsight's a wonderful thing. It makes a lot of people able to look highly intelligent after the fact. But the first thing I can say is, from my point of view, any advice that reached me, that was said to be from the medical director and from the clinicians, to the best of my knowledge, that was then shared wider. Whether or not there was stuff that never reached me, I can't comment on because it may not have reached me, but I can categorically say at no point during my time as minister did I ignore advice from Dr Ranson. It always went into the appropriate channel if it had been shared with me.
So we now have to wait till December, Tynwald, at which point this review will be hopefully concluded and recommendations made to Tynwald. Admittedly, having to second guess what some of these conclusions might be. Do you think government is doing enough to address the issues that ministers perhaps perceive as the core issues here?
Well, I think the important thing to state with the reviews is the COVID review is also due to report to December Tynwald. So actually December could work quite well because Tynwald may well have both together, unless obviously for whatever reason there's delays, should have both together, which I think will complement one another. I think it is important it's independent. This is one of the reasons why it's been looked to appoint a former High Court judge or KC to chair it. We've already got a KC chairing the COVID inquiry. And it is for them to set the timescales. One of the things I asked the Chief Minister in Tynwald this morning was about compelling witnesses to attend and also ensuring that the chair had the ability, should something be discovered during the review that they then wanted to investigate, that they're not going to be hamstrung or shackled by the terms of reference, because it's very important that independent chair has the ability to do so. I don't think you can do it quicker than December. I would have been very concerned if there'd been a motion coming forward saying, oh, we'll have it to October's Tynwald or something like that. I think, the timescales on that wouldn't have been realistic, and I don't think people, including myself, would have had faith in the process if it was going to be a rush job. I think December is a more realistic deadline, but obviously, independent chairs, they may decide they need more time, and that would then have to be looked at.
Crucially, the advice was given by the Attorney General. An inquiry set up by Tynwald cannot compel people from outside of the Isle of Man to come and give evidence. How do you think that is likely to impact on the work of the KC?
Well, I think there's lots of evidence already out there. The tribunal's done a very good job at drawing things out, so there'll be a lot of evidence to do there. I mean, I would hope that anyone who's contacted would be willing to come forward. As I said in Tynwald, if people aren't willing to do so, that does concern me. They have to make their own decisions. But, I hope people will show respect to the system that's there and will fully comply with any review.
Do you have any personal regrets about things that perhaps you could have done better, things that you would have done differently had you had the benefit of hindsight in relation to all of this? I
mean, that's a very interesting question. I mean, hindsight, as we say, is a wonderful thing. I suppose my one personal regret is I didn't realise the scale of what was actually happening. Ministers don't involve themselves in personnel matters. While I knew there were tensions between the CEO and the medical director, and I personally expressed some concerns to the then Chief Secretary on 2 different occasions about their working relationship, I didn't realise the sheer depths that it had actually sunk to. And of course, some of the correspondence between various different officers that came out during the tribunal, had I known it before, or seen that correspondence before January 2022, which is when the disclosure was done and the full bundle became available, then who knows? But, you can't go back in history. I was the Minister of the Department at the time. I resigned because I thought it was the right and honourable thing to do, despite the fact I didn't have direct involvement, and we are where we are today.
People will say, and perhaps rightly so, you were the minister, you were in charge of all this. how did you not know more about how badly this relationship had developed?
Well, the first thing we've got to say, and this isn't an excuse, by the way, we're in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. As Minister, I had my own job to do as well. Ministers do not involve themselves in line management matters. In fact, they're specifically excluded, as you well know, Phil, under the government code. The first thing a minister has to do on taking office is sign it, and it is a has, not a may, has to sign a delegation for all line management matters to the CEO. So it's not an excuse, but with a pandemic, everyone was run ragged, everyone was rushing around, and DHSC is a department of 3,000 odd staff, with the best will in the world. If anyone thinks they can take on and become minister of the department of that and know every single thing that's going on or how every working relationship is going, then I'd urge them to stand for election and become minister for DHSC, because they can clearly do a better job than most.
Ministers are expected, particularly in relation to their senior staff, to have a good understanding about what's going on and to have good working relations with their staff. That's not to say that you would expect your staff to do everything exactly as you tell them to do, or indeed that staff would tell you everything that you want to hear.
Yeah, and I think I had a good working relationship with the staff within DHSC. I would hope that almost all the staff that I worked with actually thought I was engaging, listened, and actually worked with them. And that's at all levels, from the floor the whole way up for those that I met. We had the DHSC boards, which became more problematic during the pandemic, and maybe that caused problems as well in the fact that board meetings weren't able to take place in the normal circumstances, which involved all the politicians and all the senior officers. But you do have to remember DHSC is a bit unique in the department setup because it's got that medical side. That was one of the reasons we created Manx Care, to create that separation between medical and policy, and the minister's focus has got to be on policy.
I think you and several other contributors to the debate pointed out that we needed cultural change. You referred to cultural change having been needed for several decades. Why do you think this has taken so long? Why do you think it's such a thorny issue to crack?
I think it's been tried. I do think it's been tried, but I mean, personally, I just feel that there's always been this sort of feeling of doing half measures, not deliberately maybe, but it's happened. So let's take, for instance, one of the examples I gave in Tynwald. There's always this feel, you change the minister, everything's going to change. You change the CEO, that's going to change. You change the management team, that's going to make the change. Well, I can give a prime example. During my time as minister, the entire DHSC management team changed. In total, there were 3 CEOs during my 4 years as minister, and yet we're still in this position today. And it's more than that. It's about culture across the whole of government. But I do want to emphasise something I said in Tynwald Court that I think is very important to get out there. That is, in my time as a minister, be it DHSC, Treasury, or indeed as a backbench MHK, 99% of the public servants I actually come into contact with do an absolutely amazing job. They're dedicated to their work. They're getting on with the job that they've been asked to do. And I don't think sometimes they get the credit, and particularly in DHSC, where we've got doctors and nurses working day and night to provide the services we all rely on. There are instances such as this, and they shouldn't be seen as being negated by that, because it is important that where there's abhorrent issues like this that come out, they need to be tackled. But we do need to recognise that there is a lot of good in the public service as well, something that I think gets lost in things like this.
The Chief Minister has been under a lot of pressure in recent weeks. How is he responding?
These situations are tough, I think. Everybody would recognise that, but you have 2 options. You either move away from the subject and try and switch the agenda, or you get on and tackle the issues that are in front of you. My decision, the Council of Ministers' decision, is to get on, face up to the facts, face up to the issues that have been raised, and start addressing those. And that's what we've set out to do in terms of the direct response that we made last year, the reinforcement of that response now, and also putting effectively the sort of overall strategic response, if you like, into the various different camps that parts and elements of it sit. So there's clearly the ongoing COVID review by Kate Brunner, Casey. That is important. That was never designed to be a witch hunt about who said what and why in terms of finger pointing for some COVID blame. That was about really making sure that the island did have an opportunity to reflect on what happened, but most importantly is in a better position, I hope, to respond to any future crisis in that respect. The second element is about our responsibilities in terms of making sure that these things don't happen again, that we put in place the process, the procedures, the governance, the performance management, if you like, to make sure that the workforce is a healthy, robust, high performance place to be, and that people feel safe and secure working in the public sector, and of course that it offers people the right opportunities to make sure that they can make protected disclosures or blow the whistle if there are practices being undertaken which are harmful to the public good or harmful to the conduct of good relationships within the workforce. And then the final piece, which is the piece we really dealt with yesterday, was making sure that there is confidence in government's handling of the judicial process. And the reason why it's important is because the tribunal itself made some serious remarks in terms of their concerns around the way that the Department of Health and Social Care had approached the liability hearings particularly. We heard about improper disclosures or disclosures not happening in good time and often appearing late on in the proceedings. We've heard about concerns about how evidence was presented, and we clearly heard concerns about how the chief executive at the time conducted her evidence and the manner in which that was presented. And so it is absolutely vital that we both review that, understand what's happened and take appropriate actions. But you do need to have a proper oversight of that, and you're going to need somebody who does understand the judicial process and does understand the motivation or otherwise for lawyers and legal advisors to recommend certain courses of action. So it does need to be done properly. So those are really the three key strategic arms to our response, and that will help move everybody forward. And of course, we've got to get on with some of the key objectives we set out in our island plan to improve the island.
And of course, to many people listening in, I mean, I think everyone listening knows that something pretty serious has gone wrong here. But many people will also know that they can't get a house, they can't get a dentist. There's a whole raft of issues that your government has laid out plans to try and address. And I suppose it would be helpful perhaps to understand why this particular case, and you know, again, your Education Minister, Julie Edge, in her capacity as former chair of the Whistleblowing Committee, will point to several other examples of whistleblowers or people in the position of Dr Ranson who have been quite badly treated by government in previous years. Why then? Why is this so important to actually address? What are the possibly in fairly basic layman's terms, what fundamentally has gone wrong here, and how could it have been allowed to go wrong?
Well, arguably, this does bring really to the fore a number of issues that perhaps have been bubbling below the surface for some time, Phil, and haven't probably been properly addressed, or rather haven't perhaps properly been focused on, certainly in the time that I've in Tynwald. I mean, it's absolutely vital. If you're going to achieve your policy objectives, the high-level policy objectives, and you're going to set ambitious targets for the government, for the civil service, for the public sector to achieve, or you're going to set out reform programmes in terms of things like Manx care, for example, or reforms to departments in the way they're operating, that we have a good, high-performing, robust executive and workforce that is working in tandem, but as I say, working in an environment where they can perform to their very, very best. And part of that obviously is around focusing on the performance management of individuals, but also making sure we've got the robust systems in place. And I think politically we have to take responsibility for that. We spent a long time talking about the issues that you mentioned, delivering on the housing, delivering on our infrastructure requirements, setting targets for the government to achieve in a number of areas. But of course, we have to make sure the government, of course, is equipped to deliver on that as well. And it is absolutely vital that as part, therefore, of our reform programme, the ambitious targets we've set in terms of improving people's lives, improving the economy, growing the population, delivering on the infrastructure, that we have the right workforce, of course, in place to deliver on that. And people need to have confidence in that, because when they go to see their doctors or go to see their GPs or go into the health system or the education system, they also need to know that they are working and dealing with people they trust, that are properly trained, that have been properly looked after, and who also have that ability themselves to raise concerns where there are serious failings in the system.
From what I'm hearing, it was well attested, well known by many working in government that the leadership, in terms of the civil service leadership of DHSC, the key figures spent most of their time arguing quite venomously amongst themselves. Was that widely known amongst council of ministers, that there was this broken sort of relationship?
I think you have to put things into context, Phil, and I have tried to do this. I mean, I think you take the findings in the whole and recognise that there have been failings, but those failings actually can be traced back in time, so you don't just attach them to one particular case, and you clearly recognise that some of the reports from the tribunal must need further action, but also you take it and you say, actually, we must now use this desperately difficult situation to try and now leverage opportunities for the improvement. And that's why we've set out a number of changes that have either taken place or are taking place, and they include changing the Chief Secretary's role in terms of that Chief Executive Officer position, re-emphasising the need for performance management of Chief Officers, reviewing how the Office of Human Resources is working, creating space now for non-executive directors to come on to, at senior level, onto boards to help guide ministers, but particularly Chief Executive Officers in their performance. We've strengthened the whistleblowing. We've put in place the integrity lines. We have acted to resolve these critical issues, but it's not necessarily. I think we've taken the leverage that this case has given us to be able to do those things which we probably should have been doing and focusing on for some considerable time. But when you strip the case right back, you have to put it into its context that there was a national crisis going on. And so from my perspective, I had to look after the economy, look after people's livelihoods, get money to people in family situations, look after a number of other difficult situations in and around maintaining not only the balance of the economy, but looking after people on a day-to-day basis as well. And there was a huge challenge in that particular area. We're incredibly busy. We're incredibly focused. We were delivering a range of schemes across the economy. And of course, absolutely, as a council of ministers, you were then coming in to get the information that you needed, and you needed concise and clear information. When you say, should people have known more, I think that fact probably will come out to a degree. I would have thought both in what Kate Brunner has to say, possibly in what the appointed High Court judge or similar in terms of the legal aspect. But yeah, I from my own perspective, do I look back and say, I wish I'd known more about actually what was happening at that particular time in the Department for Health, and in terms of the seriousness of the conflicts that had arisen. But also bear in mind, everybody happened to be an expert. The Council of Ministers was being inundated with information, and I'm sure I don't really want to predicate the evidence that I'll give to Kate Brunner KC and how that evidence is put forward. But I think if we strip right back, there was a huge amount going on. I don't think we should need to take this in isolation, I guess, is the critical point. There's a lot for us to work on, a lot for us to reflect on. And we need to leave, I think, some sort of legacy from this in terms of the way people are being looked after, people are being managed, and indeed I hope a legacy for a better environment, a better working environment, a stronger working environment, which will ultimately lead to better service delivery.
And I suppose, putting thoughts perhaps into our listeners' heads here, but most people will know that in high-pressure situations in workplaces, things can become fraught, but in most workplaces, they do manage to find a way through that and resolve that. And I put these points to people on last week's show, and certainly Bernard Moffat, who'd been actively engaged with HR matters with government for many, decades, was very clear that there were and always have been robust processes in place to ensure that things are properly managed, relationships work, and if they don't work, then there are processes to deal with that. So I suppose a lot of people will be wondering how in this particular situation those processes weren't followed, or how things have gone wrong.
Well, I think there's still, as I said, I mean, and I think I recognise this in our strategic response, there's still actually quite a lot to understand about this particular case. I'm not actually aware whether or not or how Rosalind Ranson sort of raised the issue formally, but we know she tried to make protected disclosures to a number of individuals, and for whatever reasons, that those protected disclosures did not reach their or were not acted on, and of course we know what the tribunal's findings are. I think I listened to what Bernard Moffat had to say, and actually for once I generally tend to agree with him. I think there have been reasonable processes in place. I think we've strengthened those now. I think the documentation, as he said, if you go online and look at what the government has laid out, I think they're robust, they're clear. You can make your anonymous report via Crime Stoppers. That will be relayed in the appropriate way through to the Office of Human Resources, and we will take things step by step to protect people's anonymity and to make sure, I hope, that the robust processes are in place to make sure these are properly evaluated. I think, as you say, if you just take one case in isolation, you could probably spend hours delving into to absolute finite detail. I think we have to recognise where those failings have been identified by the tribunal. And as I said, in the last 12 months, we've set out a firm response to that, and we have sought to strengthen the processes for individuals. And we're going to carry on strengthening them. Phil, we have now the next thing that you're going to hear about, I expect, is about how the interaction with human resources works, what we're going to do potentially to change that relationship and strengthen it to make sure that under pressure, senior officers are being given correct access and correct support in terms of the management and handling of staffing issues that will also be coming across their desk. And absolutely, I think I don't want to categorise this or just to say, well, it's happened in isolation in a crisis. But the fact is there was a national crisis on. But that's why we've got Kate Brunner in. So I hope that in the future we can understand how and reflect on how an issue at the very highest level of government between two very, very senior individuals, in particular those two individuals, the chief executive and the medical director, became so conflicted to has resulted in the outcome that we have today.
Have you yourself ever, as Chief Minister, have you formally met or informally met Dr Ranson?
I certainly recall informally meeting Dr Ranson. I can't remember the exact date, but I certainly recall meeting Dr Ranson informally at a social event that took place, and I possibly may have met her at some point in the past, but I cannot recall exactly when that may have been in a work capacity, but certainly not had any formal meetings that I am aware of that have had any direct impact on this case particularly.
In relation then to something that John Wallenberg said in the House of Keys when following your statement to the House of Keys on this matter, John Wallenberg basically suggested that by not having made a direct approach to Dr Ranson by way of a personal apology from the Isle of Man government, in a way that somehow indicated that the cultural change that you speak of as being absolutely necessary really wasn't worth the paper that's written on. I think putting words perhaps into John Wansberg's mouth a little there.
Well, I think you have to. I have written subsequently to that statement to Rosalind Ranson to re-emphasise the points that I've made and to re-emphasise my apology to Dr Ranson for the situation that she found herself in. Felt, these matters are highly sensitive, highly difficult during legal processes. I have to listen to advisors around me, and whilst outsiders looking in, why don't you just go and meet and shake hands, etc. There's a lot of sensitivity going on, and I'm sure at some point in the future there'll be a time and a place. But my job is to take this issue, recognise what's happened, and translate that into some form of action for us, but also to make sure that overall, strategically, we are picking up on some of the critical points that people now want answers to in terms of, what was Dr Ranson's influence over the decision ultimately that Council of Ministers were making. As I say, Kate Brunner will deal with that. Confidence in the judicial response process from the government and making sure that we are acting properly and that people have confidence in that respect. And of course, those issues that I've talked about that really do fall at the heart of the Council of Ministers now and the Executive to make sure we put in train those reforms we need or improvements we need to drive things forward.
And in terms of, you mentioned the legal process there. Maybe it's a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of what's been said, I don't know, but hopefully you'll be able to clarify on this. That the suggestion has been made that you effectively gave legal advice to the Department of Health and Social Care. And again, if you listened to the programme last week, you would have heard Bernard Moffat saying, what on earth was he thinking he was doing? So what actually did happen there?
Well, I think it's already been made pretty clear from freedom of information releases that have happened. There was conflicting legal opinions. The department was unsure what to do. They had a view or advice that they needed to appeal it to protect the government in future similar situations. So there was an argument around precedent. A paper was presented over at very short notice to the Council of Ministers. It was impossible for me to call Council of Ministers in terms of the timescales that were presented to me. It was a very short 60 or so minute window, and simply made that point known, and that if they were looking, if it was helpful, my opinion was that they should have, that if there was that type of implication, then they should consider going to appeal. I think, Phil, what we need to do, listen, we can get sidetracked into all these intricacies as much as we want. We've got a High Court judge or similar person now appointed. I'm sure we'll get absolute clarity and a proper judgment made around that. But ultimately, as I made absolutely clear, the law is very clear that it is the ministers, it is the department that makes the decision. Chief Minister does not, under law, have the ability to order a minister or a department to do anything. If I wanted to get into that position, we would have to go to the Council of Ministers, and we would have to get a council direction to effectively order or direct a minister or a department to take a course of action.
So in essence, you were weighing up two bits of political advice. You'd been asked as Council of Ministers to make a judgment. You were making, I'm suggesting this, maybe this is the case or maybe not, that you were taking a political view on the two bits of legal advice and then suggesting that to the Minister, presumably, or the department.
Well, as you will see from the Freedom of Information requests, an email was sent from the Chief Executive Officer or Chief Secretary at the time from their PA directly quoting me that the Chief Minister is of the opinion, and that was given across to the department, and clearly actions then subsequently happened. And as I say, This and many other issues that have come out of this tribunal need to be examined, because what has been alleged is that these were not taken in good faith. These were not decisions that were being made in good faith, that these were decisions being made to somehow protract and inflict damage onto Dr Ranson. And, the tribunal itself obviously clearly highlighted those failings in terms of the liability hearings that took place in 2021. And of course, a lot of this took place subsequent to that, once the tribunal had made their findings. And let's be clear, we heard the minister yesterday, and I'm sure that at some point you will want to speak to him. I know that there's still this, the government's position has been made clear, or the Department of Health and Social Security's position has been made clear. There's no appeal going in. We accept the award, but clearly that has not been made clear from the other side yet, and there's still time, obviously, for people to launch an appeal on these matters. But what was made clear from the minister's statement yesterday, and it clearly laid out the case that the Department of Health and Social Care was, as I understand it, facing a £7 million claim, which they negotiated through and clearly rejected at the time, and had to carry out all the legal toing and froing that was needed around that particular claim. And of course, we ended up in the position where ultimately the total claim award was £3.2 million. But all this needs to be properly examined and properly laid out, because taking one piece in isolation is probably not that helpful unless we actually understand all the other pieces of this complex jigsaw.
Tim Glover made a very emotional speech to Tynwald in relation to this matter, and then basically made clear that he had no faith in your government, and as a result was no longer willing to serve in any role or function in your government. That's a fairly damning thing for any Tynwald member to say, and indeed the subsequent actions followed, whether the subsequent action of not being a member of a department is as big a step as perhaps it's portrayed, I'm not so sure, but the action was taken and the words were said. How did that make you feel?
Well, I can't justify whatever Tim Glover wants to do, and whatever emotions or whatever is his view. That's entirely up to him. I can't control that. What I can control, what I do know, what we have to do is to get stuck in and try and get the situation resolved, lay out a platform for improvements in this area, and get on and deliver on the so many other multitude of issues that we need to tackle. And we know that this is one part, Phil, of the whole equation. It is an important part, but I've got to make sure and need to put in place, and Council of Ministers is adamant, that we end this administration, get the end of this administration with housing in a far better place than where it is. And we've got some serious discussions coming up on that in the next few weeks with Council, and I hope that we will be engaging broadly with potentially a new direction for housing. And I think the Minister alluded to that yesterday in a contribution that he made during the debate, I think during the enterprise debate. We've got to get in and are putting in a quality assurance scheme for our education. I need that to be brought more to the public attention. I need to make sure that that's robust. We've got further transitions to take place in terms of our health and social care department. As you know, the infrastructure department is working in terms of delivering a new structure for the airport, is looking very carefully at the heritage railways and how they're best structured. So we've got all these issues which must be delivered. So this is one part of it. If the going gets tough, you have to either get going or get out. My decision, the Council of Ministers' decision, is to get on, get going, and get through not only this, but get through to a much better position for the whole island, with an economic plan that offers diversity of opportunity, increased sustainability, more vibrancy in our town centres and around our islands, and of course, very importantly, will see us really make some progress with our renewable energy commitments.
In relation then to some of the steps that you're taking, the actions that have been announced and some of which are being implemented, I think it's not unreasonable to say that many people feel that the Isle of Man perhaps is a world leader in overburdensome bureaucracy as opposed to streamlined, fast and efficient delivery. Is anything that you're proposing likely to result in a streamlining of processes so people have less bureaucracy to wade through if they want to get action and decisions from government?
Won't necessarily. I can't evidence that it would lead to streamlined bureaucracy, but what I hope it will lead to and trust that it will lead to is better delivery of public service through a more focused, well-managed, performance-managed workforce that is clear in terms of its delivery, where everybody across the whole organisation is being given proper access to proper professional personnel management that you would find in any high-level, high-performance, large organisation in the private sector. Everybody is clear about their responsibilities, not just for themselves, but what the part that they play in contributing to the greater good or both of the organisation, of government objectives, but also within the island itself, and also within that to try and drive and ensure that we have the right structures in place around that to deliver the best performance. So actually may cut down, may arguably the sort of bureaucracy for individuals in terms of government long-term delivery, but I'm hoping by high-level performance management, ensuring the workforce is in the right place, that we will get on top of making sure that when we are setting out to deliver on policy objectives, that we're in the best possible place to do so.
Is it reasonable in the 21st century to have 9 legally independent areas of government rather than one single legal entity?
We made a conscious decision at the beginning of this council that we were going to see some real improvements, that we were going to be able to demonstrate, for example, that we had tackled brownfield sites, that we were able to demonstrate that we had tackled some of the key issues, that housing, for example, had been tackled, that we had improved the economy, that we had dealt with or seen considerable progress with dealing with the deficits that we're currently working with. And that we felt that the best thing that we as a council could do was really focus on the core issues and not be overtly distracted in other areas. Now, that's not to say that we would not have or engage with Tynwald in these sorts of areas, but I think my view is that you need to be clear about what the government is going to be achieved, and that limited resources can quickly become distracted and diluted, and then often you will find that so much energy and time is being taken up with very heavy weather political issues that may have longer term benefits, but certainly in the short term do very little to improve people's lives. And our focus is to make sure in this post-COVID environment that we really try to make a substantial difference and a clear difference to people's lives and the foundations that the island needs to continue to push forward in a very fast-changing world.
There have been many comments, particularly on social media, but also from some of your colleagues about the current position or the lack of confidence that the public have in the Isle of Man government at the moment. When are we actually going to see a lot more by way of action? When are people actually going to start feeling as though actually this Alf Cannan administration, they really have cracked this, we have confidence in them?
Well, I think a number of actions have already been achieved and are currently in the process. You know, we've just invested another £10 million. We're investing £18 million in reducing those waiting lists, getting those operations out for people who've been sitting around for 2 to 3 years in some cases, needing hip, knee and other operations. So that is underway. That's clearly evidenced. the evidence that I have, and I'm sure this will be reflected soon in economics reports, is that the economically active population is growing, that in 2022 we added another 400 people to our economically active base, that we are growing our businesses. I think we heard yesterday from the Department for Enterprise about the numbers and targets that we have, and we will be able to demonstrate that again by further economic reporting when it comes. And I've been out and about and I've spoken to a lot of businesses. Yes, it is tough, because of inflation and the cost of living impacts that we've seen. But by the same token, in many of our core sectors, there is very good evidence of very strong performance, and I look particularly in the digital sector, across digital e-commerce, e-gaming, and I look particularly at our life insurance sector and the performance levels that we're seeing from them, and of course generally across the financial services sector. And we will see where we are, I think, at the end of this season when it comes to our tourists, the impact that we've been able to achieve by the tourism visitor strategies that we've been employed. So, and of course, Phil, we set a clear target for house building, and we're already well underway in terms of the number of applications that have been approved for future building towards reaching our 1,000 home target by the end of this administration. In fact, my view is at the current rate of pace, we'll probably exceed that. So there's lots of areas where we have set out clear targets for this government, and where the evidence can be provided that we are achieving that. And of course, by the end of this administration, you will see further evidence of that, because we will have that 20 megawatts of, at minimum 20 megawatts of on-island renewable energy, and we will have also made considerable progress, I hope, to be providing clarity about the second interconnection, when that's going to go in and where that's going to be connected to. So there's a lot going on, and there's a lot to do, but we are making progress.
And finally, over the course of the last week or two, there have been several calls for your resignation, one very prominent one from the Unite the Union. Did you at any time consider actually resignation might be the easy option?
No, you have to face up to the issues, Phil. I mean, these situations, of course, are difficult. They're quite emotive, but you have to strip back to the substance, both of what has happened, acknowledge, obviously, because I'm in the hot seat now, acknowledge the failings and set out a clear plan to address those. And that's what I've done. As I said to you, I mean, of course I was around that Council of Ministers table, but my responsibilities were delivering the economic future of this island. And I believe we really successfully tackled that, both at the time and in terms of foundations that we've laid. And I think we're seeing the fruits of setting up things like the Economic Recovery Group and the initiatives that were put in place at that particular time, including the analysis of what the island should strive to do from an economic perspective. But as I said before, you either face up and get on and tackle these issues, or you walk away. My natural inclination, Phil, I've always tried to demonstrate throughout my life, whether that's been on the sports field or whether that's been in business or whether that's been in politics, is to get in there, get stuck in and try and make a difference.
I very much doubt we've heard the last of this matter, but we've certainly had some light shed on previously dark corners. Has the Chief Minister convinced you? Was Tim Glover right to resign? Don't forget this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now though, I'm Phil Gaughan, Goramayo, thanks for listening.